This is the first episode of a new series of Pokemon card explainers in which I'm going to cover the most iconic cards ever printed in the Pokemon TCG. So if you're interested in becoming a Pokemon card expert, or you just want to learn more about the cards you collect, I hope you stick around. In this video, we're going to take a look at three aspects of the Shining Charizard card. Firstly, its history. Secondly, its collectability. And thirdly, its artwork. We're then going to give a score out of 10 for each of these categories and average them out to provide a final score for the card. Over time, we're going to build a leaderboard with the ultimate goal of finding the greatest Pokemon card of all time. Starting with the history, Shining Charizard was released in the second generation of the Pokemon TCG as part of the Neo Destiny expansion, which was called Darkness Enter Light in Japanese. You may have also seen Darkness Enter Light referred to simply as Neo 4 because it was the fourth set in the Neo series. Neo Destiny was released in English on the 28th of February 2002. As always, the Japanese version of the set, Darkness Enter Light, was released earlier on the 20th of April 2001. Neo Destiny was the final set in the Neo series, and it was preceded by Neo Genesis, Neo Discovery, and Neo Revelation. These sets introduced the second generation Pokemon into the Pokemon TCG in the very early 2000s, and this is why the Neo series is considered to be the second generation of the TCG. Now, as the Japanese name of the set implies, Darkness Enter Light was a set that juxtaposed dark Pokemon with a new kind of Pokemon called Light Pokemon. Dark Pokemon had previously been seen in the Team Rocket set from Generation 1. The Dark Pokemon cards in Neo Destiny have angry and aggressive artworks and have dark borders around the artwork window. In contrast, the Light Pokemon cards in Neo Destiny depict happier looking Pokemon and have a white and gold artwork window. Interestingly, Neo Destiny is the only set to ever contain Light Pokemon. If we look at the set symbol for Neo Destiny, which we can see at the bottom right of the card artwork here, we can see that the set symbol depicts a darker star over a lighter star. This represents the set's theme of darkness and light. If we look at the rest of the Shining Charizard card, we can also see that it has these sort of swoosh things in the weakness and resistance section, which all of the cards from the Neo series contained. Now, there were a total of 105 cards in Neo Destiny, as well as 8 secret rare Shining Pokemon, which appear at the end of the set, one of which was Shining Charizard. The other 7 Shining Pokemon from the set were Shining Celebi, Shining Mewtwo, Shining Tyranitar, Shining Kabutops, Shining Raichu, Shining Noctowl, and Shining Steelix. That's a lot of Shining. These Shining Pokemon were a continuation of the Shining Pokemon which had appeared in Neo Revelation, which was the preceding set before Neo Destiny. In Neo Revelation, the first ever Shining Pokemon were released, being Shining Magikarp and Shining Gyarados. Neo Destiny was the climax of the Neo series, which is why it ended with so many Shining Pokemon. I think the idea behind having so many Shining Pokemon at the end of Neo Destiny was to symbolize that even though, by that time, we had discovered all of the Gen 2 Pokemon in the Neo series, there were still many more Shining Pokemon yet to be discovered. Turning to the collectability, as noted, Shining Charizard was a secret rare card in Neo Destiny. It is the rarest kind of card in the set, as indicated by the triple stars in the bottom right corner of the card. In terms of pull rates, there's no definitive data. However, from information available on forums and YouTube box breaks, it seems that the pull rate for Neo Destiny Shining cards was about 2 to 3 per English booster box, which was actually very good odds. With 8 shining cards to choose from, you'd therefore expect to see a shining Charizard in about 1 in 4 English booster boxes. While these odds are not bad, this doesn't mean that shining Charizard is a particularly common card today. It does need to be remembered that when Neo Destiny was printed over 20 years ago, the Pokémon Company printed far less booster boxes to begin with. On the Japanese side, the pull rates for shining cards is said to be much lower, although no precise data seems to be available. Maybe you could find out by opening some Darkness into Light booster boxes. I mean, those boxes probably only cost about $50,000 a pop, so why not? If we look at the pop reports for PSA, we can see that there are approximately 4,899 English unlimited copies of Shining Charizard, with 375 in a PSA 10. There are about 1,118 English first edition copies graded, with about 265 in a PSA 10, and there are only 817 copies of the Japanese Shining Charizard graded, and only 64 in a PSA 10. If we look at the price graphs for PSA 10s taken from pricecharting.com, we can see that the price of English Unlimited and first edition Shining Charizard has remained relatively stable over the past 4 years, at about 4,000 and 10,000 AUD, respectively. The sales data for the Japanese PSA 10 Shining Charizard is a lot more limited. Remember, there are only 64 PSA 10 Japanese Shining Charizards in existence, and so they don't come to market very often. The last sale recorded on price charting was for just under $14,000 in early 2023. The most recent sale I could find was for just under $18,000. It obviously makes sense that the Japanese version is the most expensive, given it has by far the lowest population. And don't worry, these are only the PSA 10 prices. You can pick up an ungraded or lower grade copy of Shining Charizard for much cheaper, especially if you can snipe a good auction on eBay. Okay, enough about the money. Let's talk about the artwork. I particularly like the Shining Charizard artwork because it is one of the few Pokémon cards in the entire TCG where the Pokémon is actually facing away from the viewer. It almost looks like the viewer is just glimpsing a momentary view of an elusive Shining Charizard as it flies nonchalantly overhead. I think this kind of artwork is so subtle and unexpected for a Pokémon like Charizard. Usually, Charizard is depicted head-on in a majestic and epic pose and blowing fire from its mouth. It's very uncommon to see Charizard depicted in any other way. I mean, just look at the original base set Charizard, or any of these other Charizard cards on screen. And look, you can see why Charizard is usually depicted this way, seeing as it has always been seen as one of the most fierce and powerful Pokémon. With that in mind, I think it's really interesting that the artist of Shining Charizard, Hironobu Yoshida, chose to depict Charizard in such a different way in this card. Instead of seeing a fearsome beast, in this card, we simply see Charizard flying peacefully away, and it can't even be bothered to look at us. I think the effect of this artwork is that it helps the Shining Charizard to look even more mysterious and enigmatic, which I feel like was the theme that Yoshida was going for. The Shining Charizard artwork almost reminds me of that scene from the first episode of the Pokémon anime, where Ash catches a momentary glimpse of Ho-Oh flying overhead.
What's that?
There is no data. There are still Pokémon yet to be identified.
I think the message behind this Shining Charizard artwork is that the Shining Charizard is so rare and elusive that we don't even get to see it front on or in the middle of battle. All we get is a momentary glimpse before the Charizard flies off into the distance. and I think this makes the artwork so much more unique and interesting compared to the way that Charizard is usually depicted. But anyway, that is just my subjective interpretation of the artwork. I would love to hear any other interpretations, so please feel free to leave them in the comments. Before we get to the final ranking for Shining Charizard, here are 3 obscure facts about the Shining Charizard card. First, did you know that the illustrator of Shining Charizard, Hironobu Yoshida, actually illustrated all 8 of the Shining cards from Neo Destiny? This is why all of the Shining cards look so consistent in their artwork and design. Secondly, did you know that the Neo Destiny Shining cards, including Shining Charizard, were the first ever cards in the Pokémon TCG to have the holofoil exclusively on the Pokémon itself, rather than in the background of the artwork? Previously, all holographic cards contained a non-holofoil Pokémon against a holofoil background, as we can see in this example of a holographic Golbat from Team Rocket. If we compare this card to the Shining cards from Neo Destiny, we can see the clear difference in the holofoil design. Thirdly, did you know that Neo Destiny was the final English set to ever contain the iconic first edition stamp? After Neo Destiny, the English side of the TCG would no longer distinguish first edition and unlimited cards. As such, Shining Charizard is one of the last English first edition Pokémon cards ever printed. Okay, now to the ranking. Here are the final scores that I chose to give Shining Charizard for each section. I will leave a comment below explaining a bit more about my reasoning, so please feel free to reply and give your own opinion. Overall, Shining Charizard therefore finishes on an extremely strong score of 8.7 out of 10. Given this is the first episode, Shining Charizard will currently sit in first place on our leaderboard. But we do have some pretty significant cards coming up, so there's probably going to be some shifts in the rankings as time goes on. If you'd like to follow this series and learn more about some of the greatest Pokémon cards ever printed, please consider subscribing, but no pressure. For now, happy collecting, and thank you so much for watching.